Take a step. Just one. Right where you are. Now what happened? You probably want to say, well, my foot lifted, the muscles pulled, the foot came down, the floor pushed back. That's a step. Fine. That's true. That's also the most boring possible answer to that question. Because for a small fraction of a second, while your foot was hitting the ground, something happened inside your leg that I think is one of the most peculiar facts about being a human being. Your shinbone for an instant became a battery, a real voltage-producing battery. Tiny, but real. And then you took the next step, and it did it again. And again, and again. Every step, your bones are producing little flickers of electricity. Right now, as you sit there, if you tap your foot, the bone in your foot is doing it. I'm going to tell you something funny. Almost all of human history went by, with people walking around and falling down and breaking bones and healing and getting old, and bone doctors looking at bones and dissecting them and weighing them and grinding them up to look at the powder, and nobody, not one person, knew that bones were doing this. Nobody, not the Greeks, not the Romans, not the great anatomists of Europe, not the doctors of the 1800s. The trick was happening trillions of times a day in every living animal on the planet, and the whole human species missed it. Until two scientists in Japan in the 1950s finally caught the bone in the act. How does that happen? How does a thing this strange hide in plain sight for that long? All right. Let me show you. We're going to start with the simplest possible thing, and then I'm going to show you a layer underneath that, and then a layer underneath that, and by the time we're done, I want you to have the feeling that the floor of your understanding has been pulled up and there's another floor, and another floor, and another floor. Start here. Take a step. Your foot hits the ground. Your weight comes down. What happens to your shin bone? It gets squeezed. That's all. The bone is a column of bone. The weight pushes from above. The floor pushes back from below, and the bone in between gets compressed. A tiny amount. You won't see it with your eyes. But if I had a sensitive enough instrument, I could measure the bone shortening a fraction of a millimeter every time you take a step. The bone is springy. It compresses, it bounces back, it compresses, it bounces back. Like a very stiff spring inside your leg. Okay. That's the obvious part. Bones get squeezed when you walk. A child knows this. A dog knows this. The question I want to ask you is, what is a bone? What is it actually made of? If you ask most people, they'll say bone is calcium, or bone is a kind of stone, or bone is a hard thing. None of these answers is wrong exactly, but they all miss what's interesting. Because if a bone were really just a hard, stony thing, it would shatter like a piece of chalk the first time you fell down. You couldn't walk on it. You couldn't run. You couldn't jump off a step. Try to walk on a column made of pure crystal. The first stress, it cracks. Try to walk on a column made of pure rubber. It bends and you fall over. Bone is neither. Bone is a composite. It is two completely different materials mixed together in such an exquisite way that the result has properties neither of the two materials has by itself. What are the two materials? One is collagen. Collagen is a protein, a long, ropey, flexible protein. If you took bone and dissolved away everything else, you'd be left with a kind of leathery, bendy structure, holding the shape of the bone but soft. You could tie it in a knot. The other material is a kind of crystal, calcium phosphate, in a particular form called hydroxyapatite. If you took bone and burned away the protein, you'd be left with a brittle, chalky version of the bone shape that would crumble in your fingers. Hard, but breakable. Here is the magic. You take the soft, ropey collagen, and you grow tiny crystals of hydroxyapatite all along it, soaked through it like sugar in a sponge. The crystals make it stiff. The collagen keeps it from shattering. Together you get a material that's hard enough to hold up a hippopotamus and tough enough to take a fall and bounce. We make this stuff industrially nowadays. Sort of, we call it composite material like fiberglass or carbon fiber. But your body was making it billions of years before any engineer ever thought of it. Bone is collagen plus crystals. Got it. But why am I telling you this? Why does this matter? Here's why. Some crystals, not all, but some, have an extraordinary property. When you squeeze them, they produce voltage. When you stretch them, they produce voltage in the opposite direction. Squeeze, voltage. Release, voltage flips. Squeeze again, voltage. The crystal is converting mechanical pressure into electrical signal. It does this all by itself, with no battery, no power source, nothing. The energy of the squeeze becomes the energy of the voltage. We call this the piezoelectric effect. From the Greek piezo, meaning to press. This might sound like science fiction, but it is not. It has been known for a long time. In 1880, two brothers in France, Pierre and Jacques Curie, and yes, Pierre is the same Pierre who later married Marie Curie, these two brothers discovered the piezoelectric effect by squeezing crystals of quartz, of tourmaline, of Rochelle salt, and watching tiny needles twitch on their measuring instruments. They put a quartz crystal between two metal plates, squeezed it, and the needle on their voltmeter moved. They squeezed harder, the needle moved more. They released, the needle flipped the other way. They had found that certain crystals were tiny mechanical to electrical converters. The effect is reversible, by the way, you can run it backwards. Apply a voltage to the crystal, and the crystal physically deforms. Push, voltage, voltage, push. The crystal is a perfectly two-way translator between mechanical and electrical energy. This is not a curiosity. This effect runs your modern life in ways you do not notice. The little spark when you click an electric stove lighter, that is a piezoelectric crystal getting whacked by a spring-loaded hammer. And the crystal converts the whack into a voltage big enough to jump a spark across a gap. The reason your old quartz watch keeps such good time, the inside of that watch is a tiny sliver of quartz, and an oscillating voltage is making it vibrate at exactly 32,768 times per second, and the watch counts those vibrations to know what a second is. The microphone on a phonograph needle, the sonar on a submarine, the device that listens to a baby's heartbeat in the womb, every one of these is a piezoelectric crystal converting mechanical motion into electrical signal, or back the other way. The piezoelectric effect is everywhere. But here is the thing the Curies did not know in 1880. Here is the thing nobody knew for another 70 years. The piezoelectric effect doesn't just happen in inorganic crystals like quartz. It happens in something else. It happens in a particular kind of biological material. It happens, and we are back to the leg now, in collagen. In 1953, a Japanese researcher named Eiichi Fukada was studying wood. Why? Because wood, like bone, is a composite material with fibers and crystals, and he was trying to understand its mechanical properties. He was finding that wood, when stressed, produced tiny voltages. So Fukada had this thought: what about other biological tissues? What about tendon? What about skin? What about bone? He teamed up with a colleague, Iwao Yasuda, who was a surgeon in Japan. Yasuda was an orthopedic specialist who had been wondering for years about a particular puzzle. When patients came to him with broken bones, he watched them heal. Sometimes he watched the healing go wrong, and he noticed that the bones that healed best were the ones that got used during healing. Patients who walked carefully on their healing legs, who flexed their healing arms, healed faster and stronger than patients who lay perfectly still. The reverse was also true. Patients in long casts, or patients who were bedridden, came out with bones thinner and weaker than they went in. There was no good explanation. Bones somehow knew whether they were being used. Yasuda suspected it might be electrical, but he had no way to prove it. In 1957, Fukada and Yasuda published a paper. The title was simple: On the Piezoelectric Effect of Bone. They had taken pieces of dried bone, put them between electrodes, squeezed them with a precise mechanical apparatus, and watched the voltage rise. Bone did exactly what quartz did. Bone was piezoelectric. The collagen in the bone was the active ingredient. Squeeze the bone. The collagen fibers got distorted. The distortion produced voltage. Release the squeeze, the voltage flipped. Just like quartz. Just like a watch. When you take a step, your bone is doing exactly this. The compression of your weight on your leg is squeezing the collagen, and the collagen is producing a tiny voltage across the bone. We are talking small voltages, millivolts, sometimes microvolts. But voltages are voltages. A cell can detect those. We will get to the cells in a minute. For now, just hold the picture. Walk a mile and your bones generate millions of these little electrical pulses. Stand still, no signal. Walk. Signal. Run. Bigger signal. Jump. Bigger still. Your bones, in some sense, are a kind of gate detector telling your body this is how hard you are being used, and this is where the load is going. Pause. Take stock. We have climbed up a couple of layers now. Bone is a composite. The crystals in the composite are piezoelectric. When you walk, your bones produce voltage. That alone is already weird and beautiful. Most people, if you ask them to design a skeleton, would not say, and by the way, let's make the whole thing into a battery. It seems unnecessary. It seems like an accident. But here is where it gets interesting. Because of course your body does not generate things for no reason. If your bones make voltage when you walk, the obvious next question is, does anything in your body care? Does anything notice the voltage? Or is it just a side effect, like the sound a cricket makes when its leg parts rub together? You make a noise, but the noise itself doesn't do anything? To answer this, we have to back up almost 70 years before the Japanese discovery to a German anatomist who never knew anything about electricity in bones at all. His name was Julius Wolff. In 1892, he wrote a book with a long German title, and in that book he made a claim that everybody who studies bones still teaches today. The claim is now called Wolff's Law. It says roughly this: bone grows where it is loaded, and bone disappears where it is not. The shape of every bone in your body is being constantly resculpted by the forces you apply to it. This sounds vague. Let me make it concrete. If you take up tennis, and you play tennis seriously for a couple of years, the bones in your dominant arm, the arm holding the racket, get measurably thicker than the bones in your other arm. Not the muscles. The bones. The X-ray shows it. The bone has added material exactly where the stress of the racket was hitting it. If you stop playing tennis, the extra bone goes away. The body takes it back. Bone is not a static thing, like a piece of granite. Bone is alive. It is getting taken apart and rebuilt all the time, and the rebuilding goes wherever the stress is. Children's bones grow in patterns shaped by how the children move. Ballet dancers' foot bones thicken in particular places and along particular axes. Boxers have characteristic hand bones with denser knuckles. Old people who break a wrist and then immobilize it in a cast for 6 weeks come out with the bones in that wrist visibly thinner than the other side. The cast protected the wrist from forces, and so the body, with its remarkable thrift, took back the unused material. Bone is some of the most thrifty stuff in the body. It does not waste itself where it is not needed. Now, Wolff was not a foolish man. He had measured bones from people of every profession, every age, every condition. He saw the patterns. He saw the way bones thickened along the lines of stress and thinned where there was none. He proposed that the bone was somehow responding to the forces it experienced. But here is the question that defeated Wolff and defeated every bone scientist for the next 60 years. How does the bone know? Think about that for a second. A bone is made of cells. The cells live inside little holes in the bone, sealed off, soaked in fluid, with no eyes, no nerves running directly to them, no voice telling them what to do. How does a tiny cell, buried inside a piece of solid bone material, know whether the bone around it is being heavily loaded by a tennis racket or just sitting on a couch? The cell cannot see the racket. The cell cannot feel the floor. The cell does not know about Wolff's Law. The cell does not know about tennis. And yet the cell behaves differently, building bone where there is stress, dissolving bone where there is not. Somehow, the message about external loading is making its way down to a microscopic cell sealed inside a solid mineral matrix. This was a great mystery. From 1892 to 1957, 65 years, nobody could explain it. Lots of guesses. Maybe the cell felt small fluid pressure changes. Maybe it felt vibrations. Maybe there were chemicals released by stress. None of it added up. None of it had a clean mechanism that worked across all the different patterns we knew about. And then, in 1957, Fukada and Yasuda's paper came out and the lights came on. Of course, the piezoelectric effect. The bone, when stressed, produces a voltage. And the cells inside the bone, the living cells, sitting in their little holes doing their slow work, these cells can detect voltage. Cells are very, very good at detecting voltage. Every cell in your body is a tiny electrochemical machine with charged particles moving across its membrane all the time. A cell can absolutely tell whether the bone around it is electrically quiet or electrically humming. Here is the picture. You take a step. Your bone is squeezed. The collagen makes voltage. The voltage exists for a fraction of a second across the bone, in particular spots where the stress is greatest. The cells in those spots feel the voltage. The cells, having felt the voltage, change their behavior. They lay down more bone material. The bone gets thicker in the high voltage spots, which are the high stress spots, which are exactly the places that need to be thicker. Mystery solved. Wolff's law explained. The bone is using piezoelectricity as its internal nervous system, telling its own cells where to build and where to leave alone. And the whole thing runs on the energy of you walking around. No external power, no instructions from the brain. The bone is its own self-tuning structure. I want to stop and admire this for a moment, because this is to me one of the most elegant tricks in all of biology. Think about the design problem. You have a skeleton. The skeleton has to support your body, but the loads on your skeleton are different for everybody. A blacksmith puts huge loads on his arms. A ballet dancer puts twisting loads on her feet. A pregnant woman puts new loads on her hips. A child grows bigger, and the loads grow with the child. The body cannot possibly know in advance how to build a skeleton perfectly suited to every individual life. So instead of trying to know in advance, the body uses a feedback loop. Stress the bone, and it tells itself, more material here. Don't stress it, and it says, less material here. The skeleton tunes itself in real time to the life you actually live. And it does it using a piece of physics that human engineers did not even understand until 1880. This is so good a design that I want to ask you something. Could you have come up with this? Honestly? If somebody handed you the problem, design a skeleton that automatically reshapes itself to the loads experienced by the individual organism, with no external power source and no central control system, would you have said, I know, let's use the piezoelectric properties of collagen fibers? Of course not. Nobody would have. The body did, or rather 4 billion years of evolution did, by stumbling onto it, keeping what worked, throwing away what did not. All right. We have a basic picture. Let's go a layer deeper, because there is more to say. When I told you about the cells in the bone, I was being a little vague. There are actually several types of cells we should mention. The bone-building cells are called osteoblasts. The bone-dissolving cells are called osteoclasts. And the most interesting ones, the ones that act like little sensors throughout the bone, are called osteocytes. Osteocytes are osteoblasts that got buried. Once an osteoblast has finished laying down bone material around itself, it gets stuck in the bone, sealed in a tiny chamber called a lacuna. From this chamber, the osteocyte sends out long, thin processes like the legs of a spider that reach through tiny canals in the bone and connect to other osteocytes and to the bone surface. The whole skeleton is laced through with this network of osteocytes, millions and millions of them, all in communication with each other, all sensing what is happening around them. If you could shrink down to the size of a grain of dust and crawl into the inside of one of your own bones, you would not see a solid stone block. You would see a vast, branching, three-dimensional web of cells, each one in its own little chamber, each one with thread-like arms reaching out through tunnels in the mineral, each one whispering chemically to its neighbors. The bone, on the inside, is a kind of buried city. It just happens to be a city made of cells embedded in stone, with tiny streets full of fluid and tiny voltages flickering down those streets every time you take a step. When you walk, the voltage produced by the piezoelectric collagen sweeps through this network. The osteocytes feel it. They send signals to the osteoblasts at the surface. Build here. They send signals to the osteoclasts. Don't dissolve here. Or, in regions where there is no stress, they send the opposite signals. It is quiet here. We do not need this much material. Take it away. The osteoclasts come and dissolve the unused bone. The mineral goes back into the blood, gets used elsewhere, for muscle contractions, for nerve signals, for any of the 1,000 things calcium does in your body. Your skeleton is constantly turning over. About 10% of your skeleton, by mass, is replaced every year. By the time you are 30, the bones you have are not the bones you had at 20. Same shape, more or less. Different material. The bones of a 60-year-old are not the bones of a teenager, even though they look like the same skeleton in the same body. The bone is being recycled all the time, guided by these little electrical whispers. I should be honest about something. The story I just told you, bone makes voltage, cells feel voltage, cells respond, is the core idea, and it is basically right. But the actual mechanism inside a living fluid-filled bone is a little more complicated than just piezoelectricity. There is another effect that also shows up when you load a bone, and it is called the streaming potential. Here is what that is. Bone, despite looking solid, is actually full of tiny fluid-filled channels, those canals I mentioned, where the osteocyte processes live. When you squeeze a bone, the fluid in those channels gets squished, and it flows. And when fluid containing charged particles flows past the walls of a channel, that flow itself produces a voltage. So you have got two things happening at once. The collagen is doing its piezoelectric trick, and the fluid is producing streaming potentials. Both effects produce voltage. Both effects are detected by the osteocytes. In a living bone, full of fluid, the streaming potentials are probably the bigger contributor most of the time. But the piezoelectric effect is real and present too, especially in drier regions of bone or under faster loading. Both effects are part of the same overall story. Your bone, when used, generates electrical signals that direct its own remodeling. Whichever effect dominates in a given situation, the bone cells do not care about the technical distinction. They just feel the voltage and respond. From the cell's point of view, voltage is up. Build more material here. Simple rule. Profound consequences. I want to take you somewhere else. I want to take you to space. In 1973, the United States launched Skylab, an early space station. 3 crews of astronauts went up, lived in zero gravity, and came back. And one of the things the doctors were very interested in measuring was, what happens to the human body when you remove gravity? The astronauts did exercises. They ate well. They slept. But every test that was done on them after they returned showed the same eerie result. They had lost bone. Real, measurable amounts of bone. In some bones, particularly the ones that normally bear weight, the lower body bones, the spine, the hip, they had lost it at terrifying rates. About 1 to 2% of their bone mass per month in space. If a person stayed in space for a year, they could lose 10 or 20% of their skeleton. The longer they stayed, the more they lost. And it happened despite exercise. It happened despite calcium supplements. It happened to fit healthy young people in the prime of their lives. Why? You can guess by now. We have built up the picture. Without gravity, you cannot take a step that lands. You cannot put weight on your bones. You cannot load them. And without loading, no piezoelectric voltage. Without voltage, no signal to the osteocytes. Without the signal, the osteocytes assume, correctly, by their own rules, that the bone is not being used. They send a take-it-away signal. The osteoclasts dissolve material. The bone gets thinner. The whole feedback loop, which works so beautifully on Earth, runs in reverse in space. The skeleton is tuning itself for an environment with no loading, and the answer it converges on is less skeleton. This, by the way, is the same reason a person who has been bedridden for a long time loses bone, or a person whose leg is in a cast, or a person in a long hospital stay. The body is enormously thrifty with bone material. It will not waste mineral on a structure that is not being asked to bear weight. The skeleton is not loyal. The skeleton is responsive. When astronauts came back from longer missions, scientists found something even stranger. The bone they lost did not come back evenly. It came back in patches, and it came back faster in regions where the astronauts started using their legs again, walking, jumping, exercising. The high-stress regions reloaded their voltage signals, and the bone material followed. The low-stress regions stayed thin for a long time. The body, given the new pattern of loading, regenerated the skeleton it needed for the new pattern. Same trick, same feedback loop, just running in the other direction. All right. I have been telling you about how the body uses electrical signals in bone. Now I want to show you something else, because once we figured this trick out, we started doing something with it. We started using it to heal people. In the 1960s and 70s, an American orthopedic surgeon named Andrew Bassett, working at Columbia University in New York, was thinking about the same Yasuda paper and asking a practical question. What if we could artificially produce the same kind of voltage in a bone that was not healing? Sometimes a fracture won't knit. The two ends of the broken bone sit there for months, and nothing happens. The cells are not building bridge material. The bone is what we call a non-union, a fracture that did not heal. Surgeons used to have to graft new bone in, or fuse the two ends together with metal ugly stuff. Bassett wondered, could we just put electrodes near the break and trick the cells into thinking the bone was being loaded? Could we fake the signal and let the bone take care of the rest? He tried it. He put coils around broken bones, ran a small current through them, generated a magnetic field, which in turn induced electrical activity in the bone. And, sometimes, not always, but often enough, the bone would start healing. The osteocytes would feel the artificially induced voltage. They would essentially say, oh, loading, build. The osteoblasts would lay down material. The fracture would close. By the late 1970s, electrical bone growth stimulators were being approved as medical devices. They are still used in clinics for fractures that will not heal on their own. The little device sits next to the leg, hums quietly, makes the bone think it is being walked on, and the bone grows. Think about how strange this is. We are using a property of physics, discovered in 1880 in a French lab, combined with a property of biology, discovered in 1957 in a Japanese lab, to perform a medical trick. We are sending fake "you are walking" signals to a part of the skeleton that is not being walked on, in order to fool a microscopic cell into building material it would otherwise leave alone. This kind of thing, I think, is what makes physics so wonderful. You think you are studying a strange property of crystals, and 70 years later it is healing a broken leg. The chain of consequences is impossible to predict. Nobody planned this. The Curies were not thinking about bones. Yasuda was not thinking about hospital devices. Bassett was thinking about Yasuda. The things connect. Let me circle back. I have taken you up several layers. Let me show you where we are. When I started, I asked you to take a step. The boring answer was, your foot lifted, the floor pushed back. I said the interesting answer was that your bone became a battery. Now I want to give you the real answer, the full answer. Try to feel all the layers at once. When you take a step, your shinbone is compressed by your body weight. The collagen fibers in the bone are squeezed. Because of a property of asymmetric molecules, the fact that collagen, like quartz, has a particular chemical orientation that makes it piezoelectric, that squeeze is converted in nanoseconds into an electrical voltage across the bone. Simultaneously, the fluid inside the bone's microscopic channels is forced to flow, and that flow produces additional streaming potentials. The osteocytes, millions of cells laced throughout the bone, each one connected by long, thin processes to its neighbors. Feel these voltages. They send chemical signals to the osteoblasts on the bone's surface, telling them where to build, and to the osteoclasts, telling them where to leave alone or dissolve. Over weeks and months, the bone resculpts itself in response to the pattern of voltages, which is itself the pattern of how you have been moving. The bone you have today is a record, in mineral, of how you have walked, sat, stood, run, fallen, and lifted in the past few years. And every step you take from now on is editing that record, very, very slowly, in the direction of the life you are now living. Your skeleton is not a thing you have. Your skeleton is a thing you are doing. It is a process, not an object. It is continuously made and unmade by the forces you apply to it. You are, in a real sense, sculpting yourself with every step. I want to push this even further, because I think there is something even more remarkable hiding in here. Let's look at the very fact that the body can do this, that a piezoelectric tissue exists at all in a living thing. I told you that quartz is piezoelectric, and that the Curies discovered it in crystals. The reason quartz is piezoelectric, at the deepest level, has to do with the geometry of how the silicon and oxygen atoms are arranged. They are arranged in such a way that the crystal has no center of symmetry. That is the technical phrase. In ordinary materials, when you squeeze them, the positive and negative charges shift around inside the material in a way that cancels out, and you get no net voltage. But in a non-symmetric crystal, the squeeze pushes the positive charges one way and the negative charges another way, and you get a leftover voltage. It is a consequence of geometry. Pure geometry. Now collagen. Collagen is a protein made of long chains of amino acids twisted together in a tight helical bundle. The amino acids have charged side groups. The helix has a particular handedness, left-handed or right-handed twisting, and an arrangement that, like quartz, has no center of symmetry. So when you stretch a collagen fiber, or squeeze it, the charges inside it shift in a way that does not cancel. You get a tiny voltage. The same fundamental geometric trick that makes quartz piezoelectric also, by sheer accident or by deep necessity, depending on how you want to think about it, makes collagen piezoelectric. Two completely different materials, one mineral and one biological. Both fall into the same physical category because they share a particular kind of asymmetry in how their atoms are arranged. This means the trick the body uses to know how it is being loaded is not a special biological invention. It is a generic physical phenomenon. Any sufficiently asymmetric material with charges in it will do it. Wood does it. Tendon does it. Some kinds of plastic do it. Even ice does it a little bit under certain conditions. The body just happened to be using a material, collagen, that already had this property, free of charge, written into its structure for other reasons. Evolution did not have to invent piezoelectricity. It was already there, sitting in the protein, waiting to be used. All evolution had to do was build a sensing system, the osteocyte network, that could read the signal. And then a feedback loop. And then you have a self-tuning skeleton. This is the way nature works, very often. It does not invent new physics. It uses physics that exists, and then it builds biological apparatus around it. Light bends through water, the eye uses that. Air vibrates from a sound, the ear uses that. Charges move through asymmetric protein, the bone uses that. The world has its rules, and life finds its ways into the rules. I want to give you one more thing before we wrap up, because I do not want you to leave this lecture thinking the only piezoelectric tissue in your body is bone. Your tendons, which connect muscle to bone, are made mostly of collagen. They are piezoelectric too. When you flex your forearm, the tendon in your wrist generates voltage. Your skin, which has collagen in the deeper layers, is mildly piezoelectric. The cartilage between your joints, which has a different protein structure but also charged components, produces voltages when compressed. The walls of your arteries, which have collagen and elastin in them, generate small voltages every time your heart pumps and the artery wall flexes. Some scientists think, and we do not know this for sure, that some of these voltages may also be acting as biological signals that we have not fully figured out yet. There may be a whole signaling system in the connective tissues of the body that we are only beginning to understand. The body may be more electrically alive than we ever realized. I want to be careful here. I do not want to overpromise. The piezoelectric effect in bone, leading to bone remodeling, that is well established. The streaming potential effect, that is well established. The medical use of electrical stimulation to heal fractures, that is well established. But the broader picture of connective tissues all over the body using piezoelectric signaling for various purposes, that is still being worked out. There is a lot we do not know. There may be effects there. There may not be. The frontier is open. Do not believe anybody who tells you, in some confident voice, that everything in the body is connected through some grand piezoelectric web. We do not know that. Do not believe anybody who tells you the opposite, that nothing else is going on. We do not know that either. But the bone story, the original Fukada and Yasuda story, the one I have been telling you, that one is solid. That one we know. And that one alone is enough to make you look at your own legs differently. So, take a step. One step. Right now. Imagine all of it. The foot lifts. The leg swings. The heel comes down. The body weight transfers. Inside the shinbone, the collagen fibers tighten and squeeze. A tiny voltage spreads through the bone. Millions of osteocytes, in their little stone chambers, feel the voltage flicker past. They listen. They whisper to their neighbors. They send a signal to the cells at the surface of the bone, a chemical message, saying, yes, we are being used. Do not dissolve us. Build us up. Over the next weeks and months, this message, repeated millions of times with each stride, sculpts the bone. The bone you are walking on tomorrow is being built, partly, by the steps you take today. And the bone you walked on today was built, partly by the steps you took last year. You are, with every footfall, voting on the design of your own skeleton. I find this almost unbearable, in a wonderful way, because it means you can never really stop. The body is not letting you out of the loop. If you walk a lot, your skeleton becomes the skeleton of someone who walks a lot. If you sit a lot, your skeleton becomes the skeleton of someone who sits a lot. There is no neutral. There is no pause. There is only the loop, running every second, listening for the signal, building or dissolving accordingly. The lazy day on the couch is not the absence of an instruction to your bones. It is an instruction. It says, less here, less here, less here. The hard hike up a hill is also an instruction. It says, more here, more here, more here. Every choice you make about how to use your body is, in a slow and quiet way, a choice about what your body will be made of in 5 years. I told you at the start of this lecture that for almost all of human history, nobody knew this was happening. That is still strange to me. Generations and generations of doctors examined bones, and broke bones and set bones, and never knew that bones were sending little electrical signals to themselves. Generations of people walked around, completely unaware that inside every leg, with every step, a little burst of voltage was being made and read. The trick was hiding in the obvious. The trick was hiding because it was happening too small to see, with no flash, no spark, no sound. Just a quiet, electrical conversation between a stress and a cell, going on inside every bone of every animal that ever walked the earth. What else do you suppose is going on inside us, right now that we have not noticed? What else is hiding in plain sight, doing its work, generation after generation, while we look right past it? I do not know. Nobody knows. But I would bet quite a lot, that our descendants in 100 years will look back at us and think, how could they have missed it? It was right there. Just like we look back at the doctors of 1880 and wonder how they could have missed the electricity in the bones. That is where I would like to leave you. Not with a fact, exactly. With a question. With the feeling that you are, all the time, walking around in a body that is doing more than you know, in ways you cannot directly perceive, on the basis of physics most people have never heard of. And that feeling, I think, is what science is really for. Not to give you answers. To make the world deeper than it was when you started. Now tell me, What is the strangest thing you have ever learned about your own body? I would like to hear it.